So I want to talk a little bit about MMT, you guys. This is, the framing of a lot of the things that I talk about is from an MMT framing. And a lot of what we do at Real Progressives is trying to sort of connect major political stories and concepts and issues and policies to MMT and frame these things from an MMT perspective. So I want to start with showing you guys a clip that I have shown you before. So I apologize to those who've already seen this, but this is Dr. Fadhel Kaboub talking about his progressive policy layer cake. This was part of the March for Medicare for All summit that was put on by M for All, at this point, a few months ago or something like that. And there were some RP members who helped participate. I hosted some of the panels, and we had some of our members as panelists and things. Huge shout out to M for All. If you're not supporting them, please go support them, mformforall.org. And if get involved in the march in DC this coming July 30th. If you are unaware of the fantastic work that they do. But anyhow, this was a clip that Dr. Kaboub put together for that summit. It's about his progressive policy layer cake, and he goes into some MMT basics here. So I wanted to show you guys this as sort of a jumping off point for the MMT discussion. So this is Dr. Fadhel Kaboub on his progressive policy layer cake.
Hi, my name is Fadhel Kaboub, and it's my pleasure to contribute this short video to this wonderful event. My purpose today is to simply provide an economic policy framework, modern monetary theory, to explain how we pay for all the major national priorities, not just a healthcare system, but a federal job guarantee, universal public services of all kinds. And the key message that I want to deliver here is that this is something that the federal government can do, and this is something that states, municipalities, local government offices cannot finance. They can logistically organize the delivery of these services, but they can't have the finances necessary, but the federal government does. So what is MMT? How do we pay for all of these national priorities? And the starting point here is that we can afford all of these national priorities. And I always want to think of these national priorities that we can afford in the US. We can pay for all these things without bankrupting the country, without causing inflation, without any of the fear mongering that you frequently hear about Medicare for All or any of these universal services. So the first thing we need to deliver is universal public services, green infrastructure, Medicare for all, housing for all, education for all, childcare. All of these things, we can afford them without causing inflation, without bankrupting the country. Number two, this is the second layer of public policy, a federal job guarantee with decent wages and benefits for anybody who's ready, willing, and able to work. So this is for people who actually want to work and can't find decent employment in the private sector. The third layer of this public policy system is a generous income support system for people who can't work or shouldn't work for health reasons and other reasons. So think of it as a three-layered cake with universal services that are provided for everyone. The second layer is job guarantee for people who want to work and can't find anything else in the private sector with decent wages and benefits. And the third layer, kind of the safety net for anybody who can't work or shouldn't work, a generous income support so that nobody's left behind. So the big question is, how do we pay for it? The MMT framework is what I'm offering here for us to consider. MMT highlights the concept of monetary sovereignty, and the sovereign in the US is the federal government, not states, not municipalities. And MMT tells us that there's a spectrum of monetary sovereignty. The US is one of the countries that enjoys one of the highest degrees of monetary sovereignty in the world, like Japan, like the UK, Australia, Canada, and so on. So today I'm not going to focus on developing countries or countries that have very limited monetary sovereignty. The key features of monetary sovereignty or a high degree of monetary sovereignty. We're talking about a federal government that issues its own currency, the dollar, taxes the public in the same national currency, the US dollar. It's the federal government that never issues debt denominated in foreign currencies. So all the national debt is denominated in US dollars and US dollars alone. And number four, the federal government doesn't fix the value of the dollar to gold or silver or any other foreign currency. So we have a floating exchange rate system, and that flexibility is very important. So we do enjoy one of the highest degrees of monetary sovereignty. Now, does that mean we have unlimited spending capacity? We should print money left and right and spend on anything? Absolutely not. And I'll give you the constraints here in a minute. So the question is, how do we pay for these national priorities without causing inflation and so on? The ultimate constraint is inflation. So the mainstream perspective tells us that we should tax somebody or borrow from somebody in order to pay for these national programs. And once you're constrained by tax revenues and borrowing capacity, you've already canceled half your national priorities, because you're not going to be able to generate enough tax revenues to prepay for all of these services, which is what states and municipalities must do. But the federal government has this additional spending capacity, that bright yellow space. That's not infinite, but it's much larger than what most people think. And it's constrained by that red bar. The risk of inflation is what really limits how much the federal government can spend. So the big question for us becomes, what determines the risk of inflation? And for me, it's two things. The risk of inflation is determined by, number one, the productive capacity available to us, the logistics, the supply chains constraints. All of that tells us that if we hit that limit and the government decides to spend more, then we will have inflation. The good news about this risk of inflation is that productive capacity is producible. We can hire millions of people to expand our productive capacity. And when we do that, we push the risk of inflation further and further out, and we increase that bright yellow space, and as a result have additional spending capacity. But that's only one side of the equation. The other side of the inflation risk is what I call abusive market power or price setting behavior. And here, think of your large corporations that dominate key markets in the economy. They raise prices simply because they can. Think of Wall Street, think of Big Pharma, think of your telecoms, think of price setters during the pandemic that we're seeing right now, oil and gas companies and so on. And that kind of inflation risk is not going to go away by spending less and not having Medicare for all and not having childcare for all. That risk of inflation can only be tamed and eliminated when we tax and regulate their market power out of existence. In other words, we democratize those markets, we make them more competitive, and universal healthcare is one of the key features of democratizing the healthcare system and taming and eliminating the abusive market power of pharmaceuticals and the healthcare industry in general. So once we know what to target in terms of where the lack of productive capacity is, where the abusive market power is, then we turn to our elected officials, the 535 people we sent to Washington, D.C. Their job is to spend strategically to expand productive capacity and to tax and regulate abusive market power out of existence. And now this becomes a question of democracy. Do we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people? Or do we have 535 elected officials in DC brought to you by super PACs, working for super PACs for the benefits of the price setters and the companies that dominate the system? And that's why this question of affording all of these national priorities is a question about inflation, and inflation is fundamentally a question about our productive capacity and corruption in the system. And now we can call their bluff when they say we can't afford it. So this is the paradigm shift that MMT provides for completely shifting the conversation at the national level about all the things that we can afford. So to conclude here, We're facing a systemic crisis on multiple levels. We have a climate change crisis, inequality, poverty, socioeconomic exclusion, and injustice. And all of these crises call for bold and urgent policy action. The problem is that these gradualist and incrementalist policies that we've been pursuing are too weak, too slow, too expensive, and ineffective. They don't even work, both at the state and local level and at the national level. So bolder, more radical, transformative policies are possible, desirable, and affordable. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions via social media or some other format.
If you guys are not following Fadhel's work, I really encourage you to go follow him on Twitter and keep up with the work that he does. He's with the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. He also teaches at Denison, and I think he is one of the best out there at communicating these sort of complex economic concepts in a way that is sort of accessible to a more general audience. So huge shout out to Dr. Kaboub. Thanks to him for all of his wonderful work. I encourage you all to follow it. And I thought that was a good way to kind of wade our way into the basics of MMT, right? And how some of the concepts are sort of misrepresented, especially when it comes to inflation, and we're seeing that now, right? With the price increases that we've seen, since going back months at this point. So next here, I want to show you guys a thread. This is by Steve Grumbine. He's our founder and CEO. If you aren't following him, he's at SD Grumbine on Twitter, and he also does the Macro and Cheese podcast, which I've mentioned a couple times on Saturdays. You can find that on our website, realprogressives.org. And he also does the Rogue Scholar, which you can find on this YouTube channel, Real Progress in Action. Throughout the week, he's doing Rogue Scholar episodes, and you can also find him on Status Coup. He's doing a couple segments a week there on Status Coup. So make sure that you're keeping up with all of his work. Subscribe to all those channels and go to our website for more from him. He says one of the most important factors of a program like a federal job guarantee or Medicare for all is that they cannot be budgeted for, as programs like the jobs guarantee are automatic stabilizers that rise and fall based on economic triggers that put them into play, similar with Medicare for all. Now, just quickly, what he means by that, you guys, is that these programs, you can never actually estimate precisely how much healthcare is going to be required in any given year. How many people are going to get sick? How sick are they going to be? How much of X, Y, or Z treatment is going to be required? How many doctors and medical techs and nurses are going to be required to meet that standard? You're never going to know precisely, right? Because there's just too many factors to try to take into account. So budgeting for these programs is a difficult prospect. Jobs guarantee very similar in the sense that it would only employ as many people it would only employ people that are not employed by the private sector. So as the private sector increases or decreases its spending and how many people it's employing, as it either is hiring people or laying people off, the jobs guarantee will naturally grow and shrink with that process, right? So again, it's impossible to sit there and say, well, we know that this year X number of jobs exactly is going to be what the jobs guarantee needs. So I just wanted to make sure that that point was clear. If a pandemic sweeps through, a federal Medicare for all would simply make payments and the costs would be irrelevant to the population. Same with a job guarantee. If there is a downturn in the economy, triggers like unemployment would propel people into the federal job guarantee. Budgeting is irrelevant. It ebbs and flows based on the macroeconomic state of the economy at any given time. This is not the same at the state level. Since states cannot create currency, Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution precludes states from issuing dollars to make payments in the case of tax shortfalls. States need to pay for stuff with taxes and bonds, not so with the federal government. So discussing automatic stabilizers being run at the state level is a red herring. It cannot be done without direct subsidization, of programs at the federal level. So creating state-based pilots cannot be conducted without the federal government subsidizing the automatic stabilizer aspect, which is vital to the success or even proofs needed to move forward. The automatic stabilizer is the most important aspect of its viability. And once you begin raising state and local taxes to fund programs, you end up with two horrible conditions. One is the capital and state. I'm sorry. One is, I'm reading like a fucking idiot here today, aren't I? One is capital and tax flight of businesses and the wealthy, or two, gentrification to draw in an exclusive community, pricing out the poor. And what are we seeing right now, you guys? I'm in the Seattle area. I'm from the Seattle area. I'm now in Bellingham, but gentrification all over the place. People in LA, how's that going? Right? People in New York, how's that going? Why do you suppose state-based policy advocates attack me as a person for what I said versus attack their own understanding of macroeconomics? That last point, I think, is more broad, you guys. I really am constantly discouraged by how often discussions on Twitter turn personal, and that's just really too bad. We should be able to have strategy disagreements without insulting each other. I don't know what to say about that. That just seems patently obvious, but so the issue here, you guys, is that states do not have the power of the purse. The federal government does. And if you understand that fundamental fact, then there are a lot of kind of ripple effects in how you view these policy discussions. And this is why MMT, I put in the title, Why MMT Matters. This is one of the major reasons why MMT is so important. I don't expect everybody to dive in on a PhD level, okay? I don't profess to know this stuff on a PhD level. I am not an economist, quick qualifier. But I think it's very important for people to understand at least the surface level stuff when it comes to MMT. Because all of these policy discussions, all of these political battles are impacted by how things are financed, or at least the vast majority of them are. So MMT is a very important concept to understand. I thought that was a great thread, kind of diving into the difference there between federal funding and state funding. And I also wanted to plug one more thing. I'm not going to read through it because it is quite long, but I keep mentioning realprogressives.org. You guys, please go to realprogressives.org for all sorts of MMT content and materials. This is by Pavlina Tcherneva, who is one of the sort of leading advocates of a federal jobs guarantee, and is a professor of economics who views things through an MMT lens. We at RP republished a portion of a paper that she had written here. As you can see, it's rather long. It's in kind of PDF form, and it's an older paper, but I would encourage everybody to go read that if you're looking to dive in on a little bit of a deeper level. I'm not going to sit here and take half an hour to read that to you, but I really encourage you all to go check out that and the other educational content that we have on Real Progressives if you are unfamiliar with MMT. And I also just want to say, you guys, to those who are fighting for state-based programs, I think you have your heart in the right place. I think you're my ally. I also want your neighbors to have healthcare and education and housing. We all have the same goals here. What MMT tells us should be a positive revelation instead of a negative one. So instead of hearing from us, you can't do it at the state level, what the message I think I'd rather have you receive is, look at all of these wonderful things that the power of the purse allows us to do at the federal level. Look at all of these things that we are capable of. MMT should be a positive revelation in the sense that it actually tells us we can have nice things. So this is part of why it's so important for the masses to understand that, because I think that the powers that be would much rather us all think that we can't have nice things, that their failures are just sort of organic economic dynamics that nobody can do anything about, right? It's a very convenient deflection for them to basically act as if, well, we can't spend to fix that problem because fill in the blank. Either they'll say we're going to go broke, or you're putting it on the country credit card or whatever, or they'll fearmonger about inflation irrationally and incoherently. Either of those is really their only response to, like, why don't you provide us with basic services? Why don't you improve our lives? Those are the only two things they can point to. And MMT pretty much demolishes both of those arguments. Those arguments become not just wrong, but entirely incoherent if you understand how our monetary system actually operates, how federal financing actually operates. So Again, you guys, I'm not trying to preach at you, okay? I'm not an economist, but I think it's incredibly important for people to have an understanding of this stuff when we get into these policy discussions and when narratives on a grand scale are formulated surrounding issues like healthcare or education or housing or any of it, right? So I really encourage everybody to look into MMT. Again, realprogressives.org for all sorts of resources. I also encourage you to read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. There are all sorts of people you can look into. We showed the clip from Fadhel there. He's wonderful. Pavlina is also wonderful. Go look into the stuff that she has on YouTube. She also has a book out on the jobs guarantee that I would encourage you to read. Anything from Randall Wray, from Warren Mosler, from Bill Mitchell. These are all fantastic sources to look at if you are lacking understanding on the MMT stuff. And by the way, no shame if you are. We all were at some point, okay? I didn't know this stuff years ago. So, you know, we're not trying to sit up here and preach at you. We're trying to help educate and bring people along. We think that this is an incredibly important concept when it comes to determining how to strategize and how to build towards the progressive policies that we all would like to achieve. So really just encourage you to engage in MMT content with a good faith attitude. And again, go to our website for all sorts of educational materials on MMT.